7, 6, 11, 5, 9 and 20 miles today, 4, 11, 17, 32 the day before. Food, 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 food.
Hey folks, Unregulated Podcast, episode number 6. I have my professor from Hillsdale College here, Dr. Charles Steele. He's a professor of economics at Hillsdale College, where he holds the Herman and Suzanne Detweiler Chair in Economics. He also serves as the head of the Economics Business and Accounting Department there. He received a bachelor's in history and a master's in economics from Montana State University. And he got his PhD in economics from NYU under the guidance of the great Israel Kirzner, a once considered Nobel laureate. At Hillsdale, Dr. Steele is the sole teacher of the history of economic thought and Austrian Economics 2 courses, and is a bona fide Austrian economist. He loves Ludwig von Mises to pieces, as Pongracic would say, as well as Rothbard, Friedman, Hayek, Kirzner, and many others. He began his career in the private sector, but later taught internationally in Ukraine, Russia, and China before eventually settling in Hillsdale. He's been all over the news, whether in Russia, China, America, and even featured on Charlie Kirk's show just a little before he passed. Dr. Steele loves the Second Amendment, his dogs, as all good men do, outer space, and perhaps above all, ultra running. So by extension, he is a masochist. He is an excellent teacher, a good man, an indisputable expert in economic science, and has accomplished a whole lot in his life. But his greatest achievement is having the privilege to teach me, because I was such a wondrous intellect, but yet had such terrible grades. I'm an enigma. Anyway, so today we're talking about capitalism. We're going to talk about space economics. And why capitalism's important. What is it, right? A lot of people on the right nominally consider themselves capitalists, aren't exactly sure where it comes from, what it really means. They have this instinct. We're going to flesh it out. And hopefully you'll learn something about not only how the system works, but how necessary it is for flourishing of the human race and the continuation of civilization. So, okay, Dr. Steele, how's that for an intro? Welcome.
That's quite an introduction. I think probably I should respond by clearing up one of the mysteries of life for you. How did you get such bad grades? You realize we're paid to give you bad grades, even when you do really well. Dr. Arnn gives us a bonus just if those grades are low. He likes that so much. So we're supposed to give you a hard time, and that's what we do. And other than that, yes, I think one of the proudest moments is having you as a student, seeing what you've done with everything you have accomplished with what you learned at Hillsdale. It's awesome.
Appreciate it. Okay, let's start with capitalism first, and I'll try to artfully segue us into space econ towards the end. So, first question, natural question, what is capitalism?
What is capitalism? Capitalism is an economic system. And it's a little bit different from just saying the free market. And I will explain that. But capitalism is a system that utilizes, it's a modern economic system. So it's one that utilizes a couple of things that are essential. One is private property rights, and especially in the means of production. It also has, as an extension of that, freedom of exchange, freedom to use your capital, your property that you have. But what's capital itself? A third thing that's a requirement for capitalism is that you have a monetary system, money. In that sense, it's not just the free market. You could have a free market system that is based on barter, but you wouldn't have capital. You wouldn't have money prices that allow you to do capital accounting and things like this. And another thing, just to briefly summarize what the essentials of capitalism are, it also requires the institutions that will protect those things, that back them up. So you think of things like minimal government, limited government, protection of private property rights, protection of contracts. Contracts are really just an extended form of property rights, where people exchange rights and make different agreements. All of that together makes up this economic system we call capitalism. It is, the market itself is an ancient thing. It's been around as long as there have been human beings. Markets, people have always traded and exchanged. Capitalism per se, modern capitalism, is a more recent development. You might say an extension of the market, because again, it requires a great deal of things that are beyond just barter. In particular, money prices, advanced markets, and accounting, and things like this.
Okay, so the first thing you mentioned was private property. Um, I guess, naturally we can contrast that with communal property or public property, property that is owned jointly or by the public via the government. What is so essential about private property? What does it allow individuals to do, and how does it support capitalism? Is it the foundation, would you say? Is it like the first prerequisite?
Yes, I would say so. That's always a little bit tricky to say something like that because you can think about what the prerequisites are. You begin, well, man has to be a conceptual being in order to have this work, and we can trace it back all the way to the Garden of Eden, or however far back you want to go, uh, and find essential prerequisites. But for capitalism per se, private property is essential. Individuals have to be able to operate, run their own lives. That also means, let me step back a second. Maybe I should start with the conceptual notion. Man is a being that is different from other animals because I think all animals have ends. They have ends that you try to accomplish, means to pursue them. But animals tend to just be guided by urges or by instincts, where man is different and has urges and instincts, but man also has this conceptual faculty. We can contemplate the future. We can think of alternatives, different things we might do, and ways we might affect outcomes and might affect the future. And then we can make choices. And we can do it in a way that's far more advanced than any other animal we know of. And that's essential. Because man has this capacity, he can run his life and at least in part direct it in ways that other beings can't do this. And in order to do that, first of all, needs a free mind and an educated mind. But he also then will need the physical capability, the ability to take what he conceives of and put it into effect in the real world. And that means he's got to be able to use some of the matter around him. He's got to have control over it, and it's private property. If you have private property, first of all, in yourself, where you get to choose your own actions, decide what you do, and then by extension, the things that you have created or the things that you have gotten through trade, through fair dealing, and that sort of thing. This makes for a world in which people can grow and advance, and it makes for a world that is quite different from one where you can't do this.
I think the second thing you mentioned was money or sound money. I want to maybe save that one, for last. Um, okay, so yeah, so private property, you need, private ownership. First of all, in yourself. If you don't own yourself, you can't use yourself. You have no right to use your arms and your legs, or maybe even your mind. And if you don't own yourself, who does or what does, that sort of thing. Um, So first, we have property rights extending from us, and the Lockean, homesteading argument would be that whoever lays claim to this unclaimed common property around us, land, resources, things like that, you mix part of your personality with that land. It is now sort of imbued with your character. It's been transformed by you, and it enters into your possession. And then later on, if you encounter other people, you can exchange that property and engage in trade, which leads me to the second thing is freedom of action, freedom of exchange. So maybe this isn't the right question, but could you
They're no
have could you have freedom of or sorry, private property rights and not freedom of action? I think the answer is no. If the answer is no, why is freedom of action and exchange important?
So freedom of action is it's actually the second. I think the second thing that I mentioned when we think of the characteristics or the conditions of capitalism. Private property is essential, and that means the freedom to own it, but also to use it. And by extension, that becomes freedom of action. And if we extend that even further, it becomes freedom of exchange. So these things are closely linked. If we wanted to sit down and write a formal model of property rights, we can start talking about different aspects, different aspects or dimensions of assets. And part of that is going to be, can you use it in a certain way? So these are really closely linked. They're not distinctly different things. Freedom of action um, from owning property. But property rights will always be incomplete. And the more complete the property rights are, the better this capitalist system will function, or the better the system of exchange will function. One might own, for example, a piece of land, but you can't exchange it. I'll give you an example of a real world example of that. On American Indian reservations, the way they were set up by the federal government, there were particular people who were given pieces, particular members of the Indian tribes, who were given pieces of land that they held title to, but they were not allowed to exchange it. It was theirs, but they couldn't exchange it without government permission. And so there is a distinction between owning something and being able to exchange it. That actually had bad consequences because they couldn't exchange it. They had to pass on equal shares to their offspring. And you go about 4 or 5 generations down, pretty soon you might have a few hundred owners of a piece of land and no one has say over it. And then it's almost de facto common property, and it becomes abused as a result, as the common pool problem. So there is a distinction between private ownership and how much you can use, the extent to which you can use something.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question exactly, but it's essential that people be able to exchange capital assets, we could say production goods, because if they can, and we have a market system, then those assets will tend to go to the people who will pay the most for them. And those will tend to be the people who can use them most productively. Give you a simple example. Again, think of a piece of land, and I drive by it and I see it. I think, wow, I could set up a farm there. I bet I could make $100,000 a year uh, net running that. You drive by it and you think, wait a minute, I could build I don't know, a factory there. You think that factory would bring, just the land for the factory would bring $200,000 a year net. And who's going to offer more for the land? You will. And so that resource will tend to flow to you. And if you're right, that means the resources flow to the more productive uses. That's an engine of growth. If you're wrong, you'll take a loss, and then it will go to someone who has a better idea.
Mm-hmm. And in the absence, obviously, of freedom of action or of exchange, if, say, you own a piece of land and it is designated by whomever has the authority over it as a farm, it is all everywhere and always a farm. It will always be a farm. That may not be the economic use for it or the optimal use for it. As an example of Indian tribes where ownership over the casino that was, located on the reservation in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, there's the Chukchansi tribe, which is very close to where I live. They've got, Chukchansi Casino there. And without getting too deep into how, tribal government works, if you're a member of the tribe, you own a portion of the casino. You're entitled to, a portion of the profits from the casino. The tribe got so big that the shares, the payouts were being diluted. This essentially resulted in a civil war for this tribe, and I believe Molotovs were thrown, and people were beat up. This is like 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, and the feds had to come in and arbitrate this.
You're going to have to send me the name of that, because I want to look that one up. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, I'll send it to you after. But yeah, you had, joint ownership in this thing that became so diluted, it eventually led to a breakdown, in, how the tribe worked, and, they shut down the casino temporarily, and these sort of things. And eventually, people were kicked out. They started doing blood tests, checking your ancestry. Um, okay. Next, rules and institutions, and then money, because I want to spend some time on money. Why are rules and institutions important? What sorts of rules, what sorts of institutions are required?
That is, well, uh, you I think you mentioned that the record for being on your show for a podcast was 2.5 hours approximately. I think if
Yeah.
we talk everything that could be said about, if we said everything that could be said about rules and institutions, we'd be a couple of days anyway. And so I'll give it at least a shot here. That's fundamental to anything that human beings are doing. The rules, the institutions that people follow. Um, by institutions, first of all, what we mean is we, excuse me, we really do mean rules. And
Mm.
there's both the formal institutions, the formal rules, things like constitutions, laws, things like this. But at least probably more important are the informal, really more important are the informal institutions. And those are rules that are tacit, perhaps, but they are things like customs codes. You could even say culture, but the ideas that people have and believe and things that guide them. Just to explain what that means, some of the South American countries, uh, after they became independent, wrote constitutions that came pretty close to duplicating the Constitution of the United States. They tried to set up similar systems and performed very differently, though. And people who studied that and asked why, people such as Douglas North, a Nobel economist, or Hernando de Soto, a Peruvian economist, have said that really it seems to, in large part, to be rooted in the informal institutions. Americans and America developed under the idea of English common law. That's our heritage. And the rights of the individual that come from, not come from, but that we trace back to Magna Carta and such. But that we have these ideas embedded in us, and then we build formal institutions that help to reinforce that. And then, of course, the whole system evolves. The Spanish countries, the countries that were settled by Spain had a different background. And that background was one of Spanish mercantilism, which emerged from feudalism, but had not gone through the English common law kind of background. And so the people operating in that system, even though they have the formal institutions that are very similar, have different expectations of each other, different ways of doing things, and the system doesn't work the same. It doesn't work as well. So the bedrock really is going to be in the informal institutions, and I think in morals. Morals is a big part of that as well. Um, I think it was James Madison who said that the Constitution was written for moral people and wouldn't work for anyone else. I'm not sure anything can work if there's not just a general sense of morality and respecting each other's rights, which is something Adam Smith also emphasized.
Yeah, that really helps explain, the failure of the French Revolution, where they very much, tried to emulate the US Constitution, but it didn't have any cultural roots or significance or history to it. And Edmund Burke, wrote about this as well in his, reflections on the French Revolution, as saying that what you can't just hand down, you know, a, a system of government, a constitution like this that is totally divorced from your society. Um,
That
and
actually, I mean, even with France, I'll even go farther. I mean, that's so. And also, the French background was the peasant. Think about what the Americans had been through prior to the American Revolution was the period of benign neglect. And so Americans were thriving and then felt that was being taken away from them. And we Americans had been free. And the French, on the other hand, had suffered under Colbertism and a very strict form of mercantilism. And the French countryside was oppressed to the point where they had famines that would kill 10% of the population. And so people actually believed, and may have been right, that sometimes famines were orchestrated just to keep them in line. And that's why things became so brutal. That's a part of the reason. That
Mm.
plus the heritage.
And last thing on this note of rules, institutions, norms, right? Those informal rules that you're talking about um, reminds me of trust, right? You need a high trust society. I think Dr. Clark told me, he was touring South America and he went into, a store and he tried to buy something and they're like, okay, come into this back room. And they close the door and they lock the door and they say, let me, go get whatever it is you're trying to buy. Um, and then they come back and you do the exchange and they let you out of the room, out of this locked room. But the reason for that is obviously it's a low trust society.
Maybe
And
it was just Clark.
maybe it was, yeah, he's,
For those who don't know, he's one of my colleagues, and
yeah,
it wasn't just Clark. He's pretty trustworthy.
yeah. Whereas here, it's really something we take for granted. Anyone, so long as you're of age, you can go to a car dealership and ask to test drive a car on the freeway and they'll take you out. Yeah, here's the keys, jump in the driver's seat. And you can, spin around for 10, 15 minutes. All they need is your license. They don't care if you're insured. Sometimes they don't even check your license if you look old enough. And what not many societies can claim that. So I think you agree trust is important and trust is only possible between trustworthy people. Trustworthy people are moral people. Um, so that I think, reflects what you were saying is this is a system that only works for a moral society. Okay.
If I might say on that, it goes a little. There are other aspects to that. If you think about a society that is more tribal, if you're a member of a particular group, some of my you may remember we had some of the students who were in the Austrian 2 class. I think it was when you sat in, not when you took it. Um, but we had three different guys who had served either in Afghanistan or Iraq, and they talked about this being a tribal society. So if you're from this particular village, there will be trust among the people there, but not of the outsiders, or if you're part of some particular tribe. So it's very difficult to take a system like ours and embed it or to put it into a society like that, where you don't have the trust issue is extremely important.
Mhm.
Um, whether he's right or not, Francis Fukuyama has argued that some societies just being high trust among strangers gives them an advantage in economic growth, and he points to Japan,
Mhm.
northern Italy versus southern Italy, which is much southern Italy being more kin based, things like that, and it makes a kind of sense whether it's really a fundamental factor or not.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing, sound money, and maybe at the same time, um, you can explain the capital part of capitalism. So, sound money,
Sure.
what's it good for, and what is capital?
Uh, what is money good for? I give economics lectures. That's my product. I'd have a really hard time if I had to buy gasoline by giving economics lectures, go down to the supermarket and get food by giving economics lectures, and anything that I consume. It's very hard to get most people to pay for them or to give me something, and I couldn't barter very easily. And yet, by giving economics lectures, I can do pretty well because I do have willing buyers who will pay me money for them. Most people don't want economics lectures, but they will take money because they can exchange that for something they do want. Money is a medium of exchange, and without it, we would all be reduced to barter. We would be living much, much poorer lives, and we'd be living lives that were just utterly different. So
Why is
money
it
is
money? Why
what's
is it,
that?
why wouldn't you be able to conduct trade in a barter system? You can barter.
I
And
can't,
why is a money system better? Where does this money come
I
from?
can't, because I produce economics lectures. Nobody, there are some people who really want them and they will pay a lot for them. I get paid pretty well for giving economics lectures, but those people are few and far between. And the kinds of things that we do, you know, it would be very hard to have all kinds of specialization with it in a barter system, because most things that you use, you have to, who am I producing economics lectures for? People from, I mean, at this point, right? Of course, I'm not being paid, am I, to be on your show? This is
You're
sort of an
being
economics
paid by the
lecture.
college.
Yeah, right. uh, they, yeah, they like that I do this. Um, well, let's put it this way. Fundamental to an economy, an advanced economy, is specialization. Individuals aren't self-sufficient. If you're self-sufficient, you're going to live a very uh, lean lifestyle on whatever food you can produce yourself, your clothing and shelter and things like that. And it's going to be minimalist. And we live in a world where we specialize. Specialization gives us incredible amounts of stuff that we don't even know about. With a monetary system, we don't need to find the people who directly want to sell us the things that we want for the things that we produce. We have this intermediary, this medium of exchange, money. And with money, I get money and then I can decide what I want to do with it, and it'll be accepted by people producing any kind of a good or service that I might want. I don't have to have the double coincidence of wants in order to barter. Um, so it allows for all this specialization. If you think about this, you're familiar, of course, with the story of iPencil. It's
Mhm.
a famous piece written by Leonard E. Read, where he talks about who is it that knows how to make a pencil. And there's a pencil. And that pencil, as it turns out, there's not a soul in the world who can start from scratch and make this pencil. This pencil had literally thousands of people who worked together to produce it. They don't know each other. They don't know each other exists, and yet they were coordinated and worked together. I ended up, in a sense, hiring all of them because I use money. I don't even know who they are. This pencil was made, I believe, in, yes, Vietnam. I like these in particular because they've got you probably can't see it. They're not round, they're triangular so they don't roll away. And they
Mm.
just a really nice high quality pencil. The parts and pieces for this were made from all over the world, came from all over the world, and were assembled, I guess, in Vietnam. And they ended up here in Michigan because I get paid in money. I couldn't barter with those people.
Money and capital. A couple of years ago, I met an economist. I can't remember where he was from, but I was at some conference, and he insisted that we stop using the term capitalism because it's a dirty word with dirty origins. Um, the great scoundrel coined the phrase, but it is the debate, at least on my side, was that it's actually a really good term because it describes almost exactly what the system is. It's a system that has capital. So, what is capital?
So that's an interesting thing that I hear people say that. It's interesting that this economist said this to you. I think it's a great word. Um, and Ludwig von Mises is quite happy to adopt it, and Ayn Rand is quite happy to adopt it, and therefore I like it, and that's 3 votes yes, so they count. It must be so. Um, the idea of capital comes from. So I think really Karl Marx did coin the term capitalism. And of course, for him, it was a bad thing, but that's just because he didn't like it. And I think he hated it, actually. I think that's fundamentally what drove him, was his hatred of the bourgeoisie and the whole system. But the notion of capital is that, let me step back. Capital goods, productive goods, tools, machines, intermediate goods, things that are in stages of production. If we have something more than just a hand-to-mouth economy, a really simple barter system, or hunter-gatherers, just a very simple farming system. If we have an advanced economy, there's so much stuff going on. And there's so many intermediate goods and so many projects and plans that are being put into motion. It's an extremely complex system. How do you evaluate what projects are worthwhile and what are not? I mean, it's pretty easy. If Robinson Crusoe is sitting around thinking, I've got, 2 hours of working time, I could either go collect coconuts or go fishing. Well, I can guess how many fish I usually catch or how many coconuts, which would I rather do? That's a pretty simple system. You just directly think about the outputs. If you got but again, if you got something like a piece of land, how many things can that be devoted to? How many uses? If you think about iron ore, steel, all kinds of inputs, all kinds of factors of production, what are the different things that could be done with those? And we have almost an infinite array of ways that they could be combined and products they could make. How do you sort out the valuable projects from the not valuable projects? You've got to have a way to do that. And prices do that, but prices require some sort of we've got all these different goods that we could manufacture, these different projects we could undertake, services we could do. How do you tell which are valuable and not? Because you're just comparing apples and oranges. It's worse than that. You're comparing all kinds of incommensurable things. Can we find a common denominator to measure or to count them in? And the answer is yes, if we have money prices. Money will help us to do that because then we can convert everything into an opportunity cost, which is the price of something. And that allows us to compare projects. So what's capital? If I have a set of productive assets, a set of factors of production, capital goods, we can call them. And I'm thinking, I could put those together and combine them in a certain way. And I develop these outputs. I don't know, call them atlatls. Atlatls are a very important output.
Mhm.
And we can explore that later. But I think I can produce 100 atlatls and I bet they would sell for $100 a piece. Right there, I've said that would produce $100,000 in income for me if I do that. But what else could I do with them? I could contemplate, I could also sell, I could convert them into bows and arrows. And bows and arrows would probably sell, well, there's a lot of people making bows and arrows. That's a pretty competitive market. I bet they'd only sell for $50 a piece. Yeah, I'll make the atlatls because that looks like the more productive use of that asset. And so prices are what let me do that, or expected prices. And I've been able to compare bows and arrows versus atlatls. And then someone else is thinking, so anyway, so I can go ahead and I can engage in my project, see if I was right. If I'm right, I made $100,000, and if I was wrong, well, maybe I should find something else to do with my capital. But that's what I've got is capital. It's an estimated value of my productive goods. That's what capital is. Capital is the value or the estimated value, the appraised value of productive assets. And once I can appraise that, I can compare it to alternatives. And other entrepreneurs or other people can compare it to what they think they could do, and they can bid on it. And this gives us this competitive system where we have numbers, we have prices, we have capital values. They will tend to make resources flow to where they're most productive, or where we think they will be most productive. Just like the earlier example I gave you with land, and why private property and exchange would tend to make things flow to where they are most valued. It's the money, the capital account. Money gives us prices. Prices give us capital accounting, so we can start to guesstimate what those opportunity costs are, what the value of something would be in different uses, and direct it to the highest valued ones. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfectly. Although I am, somewhat of an expert in this, but that makes perfect sense to me.
That's
Why
because
does
you
it?
had such a great teacher,
Yes. Why does it need to be sound? What happens to an entrepreneur's ability to correctly predict what these, expected future prices are before he engages or embarks on some sort of production process?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because when
Prices
I
are
got
changing every day, Dr. Steele.
this is 5 Ukrainian hryvnia. When I first got this, which was probably about, I don't know when it was. When I got it was about roughly 20 years ago, let's say. This was worth about $1. It's not worth that now. So money is most of the money that maybe all the money, almost all the money we have today is fiat currency. Got another one here. These these are not props that I set up for this. I've always got stuff lying around. This is my life savings on my desk. 20 euros and 5 hryvnia. But I usually have a little bit of cash sitting around for demonstrations purposes or something. Um, why sound money? Especially since we have fiat currency, it's possible for the people who operate the currency, who manage it, a central bank or the Federal Reserve, a system of banks, to expand the currency. And when they do this, it changes the value of the currency. I speak pretty carefully on these things because I don't want to. I just because I want to make sure it's clear what I'm getting at. It has no currency doesn't have an inherent value, but the more you get of it, the less people will attach to it. And by expanding it, the money supply greatly, it loses its value quickly, and it makes pricing more difficult. If if my currency doesn't change in value very much, then I think, okay, I can buy these inputs for $100 today, and I bet in 1 year I can produce something that will be $200 in real terms. I can double the value of these inputs, and that's what people will pay. And then I have to discount because it's in the future, so it's not as valuable to me, and I do have time preference. But I can do that. But if the value of the money is changing wildly, it becomes much more difficult for me to make those calculations. Also, if an entrepreneur is getting price signals, people are bidding, he's got some stuff to sell, and he's thinking, I'm going to sell it for, these items I thought would sell for $10 a piece, but wow, they're going off the shelves at $15, $20. Is that because there's more demand, or is it because all prices are going up and there's just more money in the system? And it becomes very difficult to disentangle that. Mises talks about that in Human Action. Robert Lucas called that the signal extraction problem, where entrepreneurs can't tell the difference between an increase in demand for their product versus for their particular product, which means they should expand their production, or whether it's just a general diminishing of the value of the currency, it's inflation, in which case they should not be expanding their production. And so it injects confusion into the price signals that before were indicating the value that people put on things and the relative scarcity, but now it's also that the money itself is being debased. That's why sound currency is necessary. And I don't have any of those bills around here, but somewhere I've got a 100. I've got some bills from the German and hyperinflation in 1923, where they go from it's something like a 25 mark bill up to one that's 1 billion marks. But then I've got one that is from the Zimbabwean hyperinflation, which
Yes.
is a 100. Yeah, I think you've seen it. It's a
Well,
one.
I own some. Folks,
Oh,
if any of
you're
you
a
want to if any
fellow
of you want to
trillionaire.
become a trillionaire, you can go on Amazon, and for $20 you can buy a trillion Zimbabwe dollars.
Oh, wait, how much did you have to pay?
$20.
$20?
Yeah.
Wow, this is one of my best investments. I only paid $6 for it at a gun show in
It's
Pennsylvania.
like a set. You get like all the different
Okay,
denominations that they
good.
have. So
Okay,
yeah,
all right. No, you're a
get
big
rich
investor
quick.
then. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Anyway, sound money is important. Anybody who has been through an inflation would understand that. If people, and I think Americans tend to get that now. I had met America. We had the period a long period of stability in this country, and I think people who grew up in that didn't really understand the notion of inflation except under, as a sort of intellectual
Mm.
kind of thing. I actually experienced this when I was teaching in Russia, um, because Russia had, it wasn't so much an inflation, but they did have inflation, bad by my standards, but not by theirs. But they'd had a currency devaluation because of their debt crisis. But one of my colleagues was going to take a job in after getting paid in American dollars in our American education program, was also going to stay longer and take a job in Russia that would pay in rubles, and didn't get the idea of how inflation works. She was not an economist, and when she kind of found out, she said, "Oh, wait a minute." So I get paid this much now, and it's worth only that much later. I think that was a real wake up for her. But when reality sets in, you find out that these things are really serious.
Right. Yeah. Argentina, Venezuela, Zimbabwe. I think Argentina and Venezuela are probably most familiar to people. Um,
Uh,
and then, like
One of
those historical examples, Weimar Germany and
my,
places like that.
one of my colleagues, one of my friends who was in the PhD program with me, was from Argentina, and he said that before he came to NYU, he said he was working in an office, and they would pay them. I think it was daily. They get paid. They give them the paycheck before noon. I think I probably told you this.
Yeah.
And then they would close the office because everyone out to cash the check and convert it into real goods. Because if you waited till the end of the day, it had lost too much value, too
Mhm.
much, the inflation rate was too high. So he said, we just went out and cashed it in and spent it on something that you could store. And that means that, that accelerates the debasement of the currency because you have less work being done, less stuff being produced, and it just accelerates the problem.
Yeah. People trying to get ahead of the price inflation. Um,
Yes.
so are really going through a pretty significant, inflation right now. Between January of 2020 and summer of 2021, the money supply, as measured by M2, increased by about 40%. It dropped off for, a trillion, couple trillion dollars for a year and a half after that. And we're right back up to that level again. Um, the effects of this are lasting. I mean, prices are still going up for groceries. Housing is going up. There are some economists, as you know, who say it doesn't really matter what your M2 is. Doesn't matter how much money you have. It's neutral. Could you comment on why, even though we could assume that all prices increase by the same proportion, everything doubles. What about savings though? What's happening there?
Well, I'm always suspicious of the neutrality arguments, but sure, we can take that for granted, or we can take that as part of just that aside. Um, what happens to savings? Well, they become less. They shrink. It would tend to favor when you have something like this going on. It tends to favor certain kinds of investments over others. Certainly, you don't want to just if you have a high inflation rate, you don't want to put your money into a bank account that is paying a low interest rate. Um, that's a sure way to watch it dwindle. And as a result, you have less capital accumulation, less saving. There is a tendency to put money into the stock market, and so you'll see share prices rising, things like this. But none of this is innocuous. The people who are it's I think probably most seriously, it affects the poorer people more heavily. Someone who is financially fit, financially well situated, and sophisticated can stay on top of inflation like this, while the average uh, lower income worker is just out working, working a blue collar job or a day labor or something, or uh, uh, some kind of unskilled labor. And they don't have the capability of addressing this the way that the way that I would. So it tends to hurt the lower classes of society and probably contributes to inequality. I'm just thinking about inequality. A friend of mine who is retired philosophy professor, not from Hillsdale, he had been quite a leftist until pretty radical leftist, until he read Thomas Sowell's uh, Basic Economics.
That'll do it.
And he said his reason for being a leftist was that he favored the working class. He always thought that socialism was good for the working class. After he read Basic Economics, he thought, no, I was wrong. Capitalism is good for the working class. And as he put it, I really don't care about anybody else. I don't care if it's good for the rich people. I haven't really changed in that sense, so I don't think of myself as a conservative or a libertarian. I only care about not only, but mostly about the working class. And if socialism helped him, I'd be for that. And it turns out capitalism. But one of the points that he made was that the working class, and there's some survey evidence to suggest this. He says it's not that they envy the rich or that they're angry at the rich or something like this. That's not the problem with inequality. The problem with inequality is when it was acquired unfairly. And that's what so he argues, at least what John argues, is that so many people what they dislike is the idea that people got ahead by not by being productive, but by some sort of unfair means, by rigging the game or something like that. And in some sense, this high inflation environment is a rigging of the game in favor of people with a lot of capital who have a lot of flexibility and in what they can do and ability to get advice in how to use it. And so I think that's one of the really harmful things about it. That's one of the harmful things about inequality if it comes from the wrong source, not from productivity, but from gaming the system. I think that undermines society.
Yeah. Okay, let me try to wrap this up before we switch to our last thing, which is space econ.
They're pretty closely
So,
connected.
yeah. So, and let's see if I can actually pull this off and make it artful. Okay.
You're capable of it, I'm sure.
So you gave an example of a farmer, right? Or someone who owns a piece of land. He can set up a farm or he can set up a factory. In order for that to occur, he needs to have private property rights in that land. He needs to then have the freedom of action and exchange in order to use and develop that land. When he's making his decision as to whether to build a factory or, run a farm, he needs to be able to refer to a sound money which expresses his alternatives and money prices, be able to compare those and engage in economic calculation subjectively, and have some reasonable belief that he'll be able to actually carry this out because civilization isn't going to collapse if he has any issues. He can have police and legal system come to his aid, and be able to build his factory in the end. Behind all that is an entrepreneur. There is a person, and I know Israel Kirzner, talks about this a lot. You like space econ. Here we have an entrepreneur like Elon Musk and also Jeff Bezos, who were both racing into space. And you talk about this all the time, and you love trying to, I guess, extend our economic sphere into the exosphere around the planet. Why do you like space econ? What are its prospects to you for humanity?
Um, there's a great deal that I could. So, as you mentioned, I teach a class on this. It's just a 1 credit class right now, but it could be we could expand it into a 3 credit if we get the time, easily. Um, well, you've raised several questions in my mind without maybe even realizing you've done it. But first of all, why is it so exciting? It's because a couple of reasons. First of all, there's enormous economic potential if we just think about, oh, you can make a profit there. You can do a lot. There's so much that can be done. This is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar part of the economy relatively soon. We're not at a trillion yet, but it'll be fundamental. It'll reshape the way that people operate economically. And that in itself is a big deal. Almost any mineral, any kind of material that you can think of that we need, that we can use, that can be turned into a resource, is available in space in quantities that exceed what we have on Earth, and readily accessible in certain respects. You could do manufacturing in space that once this is done, it will, you can accomplish things that can't be done, either can't be done on Earth or can't easily be done. So the productivity potential is tremendous. You have the potential of almost unlimited energy, because solar power, when you're in space, is really easily available. You don't have weather, and it doesn't get to be night. It's 24/7, so to speak. It's all the time. You've got solar energy that's readily accessible. You've got all this stuff that could be done there. I'll say something else about it, though, and that's that human beings, man is not just we're not just consuming material stuff. We're spiritual beings, and part of what's wired into us, I think our Creator gave us this. Or we evolved this. It's the same thing, but the one of our characteristics is that we explore, we seek the new, we're curious, we rise to challenges. The best part of us is that we try to build and do new things. This is what flourishing is about. We just had Anne Bradley here. She's an economist, and her specialty is writing on one of her specialties is writing on the link between biblical concepts of flourishing and the free market. And she says that the free market is essential for that. She goes through arguments like this, but there's something wired into us. There's something about man's spirit that we need to go on and explore and advance. And our next frontier is space. So I think that in some ways it's kind of a spiritual thing. I'll say that we have our Center for Commerce and Freedom, the Hutchison Center for Commerce and Freedom. I'm director of that. We have our annual conference coming up. We're going to be talking about these things. One thing I'm going to do in the opening address that I will give is emphasize that people have a mindset sometimes that, like, everything is so bad and look at all the problems. That's totally a wrong mindset. We have to be thinking, look at all the opportunities we have. We're on the verge of accomplishing things that we can hardly imagine. We have so much potential if we will use it. And I think that's what space represents to me. There's so many things that could be accomplished, that it becomes exciting. It's like there's nothing you can be depressed about when you've got so much potential, so many things you could do, so many things you can be involved in that are meaningful for life. That's why I get excited about it. Anyway, did I answer your question?
You did. Well, obviously, the main obstacle at the present moment, standing between us and becoming a multiplanetary species, out there in the ether, is the cost of lift. The economic cost of actually putting a rocket, into orbit around Earth or sending it out into the solar system. I guess a follow-up question there is what needs to happen here on Terra in order to bring down the cost of lift so that we can become multiplanetary?
What we need to do is being done already. With the space shuttle, it's estimated to, there are two fundamental problems. You hit the first one, and that's the cost of getting out of Earth's gravity well. How do you get up into space? That's expensive. When NASA was doing it with the space shuttle, the cost per kilogram to put a kilogram of matter into low Earth orbit was $65,000. That's $65,000 to put 2.2 pounds per 2.2 pounds that you put into the atmosphere, into orbit. Elon Musk has that down to about $1,000. That's an incredible cut. Part of that is the reusability. That's fundamental. If every time you flew an airline plane, you threw it out after one flight, it would be expensive. But that's one thing. Bezos and others are Rocket Labs, others are on his heels on that. And they claim, and NASA has also claimed this, that they will get it down to the range of about $100 a kilogram. And at that point, it becomes really inexpensive to go into space. You conquered one of the really difficult, well, you conquered the primary economic barrier to getting into space. At that point, space can pay for itself. If it's something that can't pay for itself, then it's just an expensive hobby. But it's going to be the kind of thing where you won't be able to afford not to be involved in space because there's so much potential there. So I think that the main thing to do is let the entrepreneurial system continue to work. It was the switch from government cost plus contracting to an entrepreneurial bidding kind of contracting for space, which happened in the United States and other countries, that led to the entrepreneurs getting on this problem and figuring out how to do it cheaply. That's the first thing.
Yeah, awesome. Dr. Steele, thank you. I know we're running out of time. I want to share a reading with you really quick. And then I want you to pitch your Hillsdale class and books and articles and things like that so people can see more. Let me know if this sounds familiar to you. And of course, what you think of it. Economics is the youngest of all sciences. But if they fail to take the best advantage of it and disregard its teachings and warnings, they will not annul economics. They will stamp out society and the human race. What do you think of that?
I think it's important enough that I keep it with me at all times. This is how Ludwig von Mises starts human action and how he finishes it. And I think he's exactly right. Economics is a set of it's knowledge that we've accumulated about how how human societies actually work. And we can ignore it. We ignore it at our own risk. It's essential that socialism doesn't work. We can have a socialist system. We will also destroy civilization if we do. We can have a capitalist civilization, and we can be living on Mars, and we can be living in Dyson spheres and things like that, and we can thrive. It's fundamental.
Thanks again, Dr. Steele. And okay, folks, I didn't say this at the outset, but yes, Dr. Steele has a class on exactly this topic called Capitalism. It is available for free on Hillsdale College Online Courses.com. I'll put the link in the description below. I know you're also working on a book. What's your book called? And when do you expect that to come out?
The book is so the course is Understanding Capitalism, and the book is Understanding Capitalism. I thought it was a good title. The book itself is going to be an extension of some of the ideas that are in the online course. And the online course is it's very good. And I'm not saying that just because I'm in it.
It is really good. I've watched done a lot of those classes. The production value is great. The content is exquisite. Yeah, it's really good.
The people who finance that for us, the Schleichers, put a lot of money into making this good, and I'm really grateful to them for it. But as they say, we're unapologetic capitalists, and we want this to be good. And it came out really nicely, and it gets into it gets into the nuts and bolts, of course, of how capitalism works, some of the stuff we've been talking about, but it also gets into the moral aspects. And I think it's essential that people understand that capitalism is a system that really rewards morality. So the course is good. The book, the plan is to have the rough draft done, the first draft done by the end of this year, and then we'll see where it goes from that to have it develop further. I hope that it will be I've got a lot of, I think, additional material that I want to put into it. I'm really enjoying writing it. I've got some other writing projects that I've got getting out of the way here this spring, and then getting a lot done in the summer. Another thing I'll mention is that we have our Hutchison Center for Commerce and Freedom here at Hillsdale College. I'm the director of that. We do an annual conference, and that's available online. Don't ask me what the information is available online on that. But
And it will be in the description.
we put together a one-day conference. I understand we'll be honored to have Michael Lucas there this year attending. But we're going to have some great speakers. We do panels and things like this. And we try to give the people attending a really good sessions, which get into applications of capitalism to business and various aspects. This year, we're doing the Great Wealth Transfer, which is the transfer of assets from the baby boom generation to later cohorts, and some of the economic and business issues around that. So lots to do. We're advancing capitalism. We're making things better, and we want to be able to sit here at the end of this century saying, wow, this was the best century yet. And now we're going to make it even better when we get into the 22nd century. That's the goal. And we'll be on Mars when we're saying that.
Yeah. That event is Friday, April 17th in Hillsdale, Michigan at Hillsdale College in the Cyril Center. Folks, if you're in Southeast Wisconsin, that's a 5-hour drive. That's real easy. Get an Airbnb. Hillsdale's a charming little town. Go get breakfast at Finish Line and get beers at Pub and Grub. So if you end up going, I'll be there. Dr. Steele will be there. We can network and talk to you.
Yes. If you're watching this, see this, say hi to me when you're there.
Yeah. Okay, folks, that's all for this episode of Unregulated. I want to thank you, Dr. Steele, for coming on, and thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you.